me, just because, radically queer isn't something that I ever really ascribed to myself originally. But through my work, I've kind of created, this is sad. I'm very not tech savvy, apparently. Okay, we're gonna wait on that. Through my work, I've kind of created this weird position for myself in the Kansas City community. It really doesn't make any sense that I can be the person I am, dress the way I do, have the piercings I have the hair the way I have it, and be one of the most respected voices for LGBT people in Kansas City and in that surrounding area, in Missouri and Kansas. And it's through this that I have kind of come to love that term radically queer. I'm not really here to describe to you what queer is. I think that's something, the beauty of queer is that it defies definition. Queer means so many different things to so many different people. For me, it is a rejection of the norms of sexual orientation or gender identity that we put upon ourselves or that society puts upon us. What I'd like to talk about right now is just the term radical, though. Radicals kind of got a bad rap in recent years. We usually, when we think of a radical, we think of someone who is so far on the fringe that no one would take them seriously. It's kind of become the common usage of the word. The original definition of the word radical, though, was to the root, to find the root of something. And that's the definition that I like to work by. Whenever I'm, ascribe that term, radical, I like to think of myself as someone who is looking to find the roots of the problem rather than to put a Band-Aid on the problem. Something that I think is a good analogy is when we are doing food drives, when we're trying to feed the hungry, are we trying to help them become not hungry, or are we just giving them food so that they're not hungry today? These different things, like, are we going to the root of the problem, or are we just putting a Band-Aid on a wound that is still going to be there? So I'd kind of like to take you through my life. How I started in the town of Drexel, Missouri, population 1,090, and to the person that I have become today, this radical queer you see before yourselves today. So I was born and raised in Drexel, Missouri, and it is just as small as it sounds like it is. 1,090 people. I had a very typical rural Missouri upbringing, which, feel free to insert whatever that is for you, whatever you picture that as. It's probably pretty close. Like, I grew up playing in the spillway after school, catching crawdads and tadpoles, and these are things that do still happen. We had a gas station in the town, and that was pretty much the highlight of the town. That's where everyone hung out. It wasn't really until, I think, my 14th birthday, that was when something that really life-changing happened. We got the internet in Drexel, which was a very big deal. It was 56K, if anyone can remember what that is. And does anyone actually know what that is? Okay, yes, we got two people in the back. 56K internet speed, which was very exciting. So this internet connection opened up a new world for me, having grown up in Drexel, Missouri for those 14 years. There's not a lot of radicalizing forces in Drexel, Missouri, if you can imagine. But after getting the internet, I found the thing that most post-pubescent people that have the internet find, which was pornography. Shortly thereafter, I discovered that I was gay. That I was, in fact, attracted to males, and that was something that hadn't really occurred to me until that internet connection allowed me to realize that. So I was much luckier than most of my rural queer family, in that I didn't really have a large denial period. I knew that I was attracted to males, and I knew that was okay. I knew that I also couldn't tell very many people yet, though, just being at that point in my life. I grew up in a pretty apathetic Methodist household, and my parents were pretty progressive by rural Missouri standards, but that's still pretty conservative by most standards. So I knew my original plan was to come out to them when I was about 20, call them on the phone from several states away, and be like, hey, guess what? That is not how it happened, though, as I'm about to explain. Just after turning 17, I had told a few of my close friends, and I had even managed to get myself a boyfriend in the neighboring town of Harrisonville, Missouri. It was a big deal because that town had a Walmart, and if you're from a small town, you know that's a big deal. So I always had an excuse to be in Harrisonville, Missouri. So it was Valentine's Day, and I was very excited because it was the first time I'd ever had a boyfriend on Valentine's Day. I had bought roses for him, and we had planned a romantic date that night in Harrisonville. It was icy that year, and I remember that because I had a forensics tournament in a nearby city, and my dad decided to drive me to it because it was so icy. The forensics tournament came and went. I did terribly. I was so horrible at debate. And then we came back, and I remember the ride back because my dad, I had never heard a silence so loud. My dad did not say a single word to me on the entire drive back home, and I didn't know why. I just assumed that he had gotten in a fight with Mom, and didn't want to talk about it. It was when I walked into the house, into our house in Drexel, Missouri, that I realized that it was not that he had gotten in a fight with Mom. As soon as I walked in, my little sister was in the living room, and my mother screamed at her to go to her room. And so I just opened the door, and then the first thing I hear is, "Caitlin, go to your room." Like, okay, what did I do? You know, what have I done in the last 3 months that could have pissed off my mom so bad that my little sister cannot even be in the room for my punishment? So my little sister ran to her room, and I had no idea what I had done, but I knew it had to have been bad. So my mom sits me on the couch, and then they sit across the way from me on the opposing couch, and they look at me, and they say, "We found a picture." And I knew what that meant. By "we found a picture," they meant, well, I was at the debate tournament, they had gone through my room, and inside of my mattress found a picture of my boyfriend and I kissing that I had hidden there. So they didn't just find a picture, they looked for a picture and found a picture. But I knew what that meant, and I immediately started crying. I knew that they had seen that picture, and the next thing that she did was she looks at me and she goes, "Are you queer?" And I chuckled, I did, because it was just such a loaded question that she didn't realize was a loaded question, because she didn't mean it in this way of it being a derogatory term. She didn't mean it in an insulting way. She didn't mean it in a repossessed, like, we have taken this term back, empowered way. She meant it in the rural understanding of the word queer, which is just what you call people who are gay. So she asked, "Are you queer?" And I chuckled, which was the wrong response. I should not have done that. She was not very excited about that. She yelled. And then she yelled again, "Are you queer?" And I said yes. And that was a pretty pivotal moment in my life, the next 3 hours, because I heard things from my mom that night that I wouldn't wish my worst enemy to hear. I always kind of joke that I didn't come out of the closet. I know this is National Coming Out Day. I didn't really come out of the closet. I was thrown out of the closet. This went on for about 3 hours, her screaming, my crying, and it ended up in what it had been building up to that entire night, which was, it's either him or me. One of us is leaving the family tonight. And full disclosure, I would have picked her. You know, if that had been an option, I would have picked my mom. But it was not actually an option as she had presented it, and I was the one that was required to leave. Before I left, I went to my little sister's room. My little sister, I got all the extrovert, she got all the introvert. We're pretty much the same person otherwise, though. So I went to her room, and I had composed myself. You know, I was ready to, just say goodbye to my little sister, and it was totally fine. She was totally fine. She wasn't crying until we made eye contact. And as soon as we made eye contact, we both just start shooting tears. It was just this connection that had been made, and the only thing that I could manage to ask her that night, out of all the questions, all the things, I was like, "You knew, right?" And she goes, "Of course I knew!" And that was the last thing that I had said to my sister on that night, because, I felt like it's pretty obvious. So we both started bawling, and then that night I packed a few bags of my stuff, got in my car, and I left the house. This was, as I talked to Colette about this was probably the first step in a long process of radicalization of my politics and of my life, because this brought me to Paola, Kansas. I ended up, this next few weeks, I really reassessed a lot of things in my life. I spent time sleeping in my car, sleeping on friends' couches, just kind of trying to get by until I found an apartment above this frat dude in Paola, Kansas, population 5,011. So it was a much bigger city than Drexel, Missouri, much bigger. So this really was a transformative time in my life. I should say, though, that I did have it better than a lot of my friends who've been kicked out did. I owned my own car, and I had a part-time job, which put me in a lot better position than a lot of people that are thrown out of their house at that age. So while these were some of the hardest weeks of my life, they were also some of the most transformative. I knew that I was attracted to men, and I also knew that intrinsically, in the core of my being, I knew that there was nothing wrong with that. And that wasn't something that was up for debate. So knowing this made me start to question what other things that I had been taught, not just from my parents, but from my community, from society, that might have been skewed. Because I knew that they were so wrong about this one issue, which made me know that they must be so wrong about so many other issues too. And it really kind of provided a blank slate for me to think about all the bigotry that I had encountered in rural Missouri, all the classism, all the racism, all the ableism, all the sexism, all of the isms that are so prevalent in those communities. So I did a lot of thinking in these weeks. I also questioned a lot of things that I had never really questioned before. I read in this time Mahatma Gandhi's The Story of My Experiments with Truth, which I really recommend because that's exactly what it is for him. It was a story, it was an experiment with truth. It's always building upon previous truths and learning new things. And reading that, seeing his view on animal welfare made me remember a very vivid memory of my childhood from when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. My mom, I really liked the making hamburger with my mom. I liked the feel of it in between my hands. And I remember my mom was making hamburger one day, and I was just like playing with the hamburger, and I saw like this red liquid in the container, and I was like, "What's that?" And my mom goes, "That's blood." And I had not yet put the connection that hamburger equals cow. That was not something that I had done yet, and so I just remember being like, "Then what are we doing? How can we do this? If this is a cow?" And my mom said to me, and this memory became so vivid at this point in my life. My mom said to me, "I just try not to think about it." And I realized that was kind of what I had been conditioned to do through all of my actions. I had been conditioned to not think about my actions, about the effects of my actions, about what I'm supporting simply by purchasing something or by promoting something. That there really is a root of these things that we don't really look at when we don't allow ourselves to think about what we're really doing through all of these actions. So I pretty much immediately went vegetarian after that memory. And I realized at that point that I wanted to dedicate my life to making sure that what had happened to me in this situation wouldn't happen to other people. Well, I was lucky and I made it out of this situation alive and healthy. A lot of people that are in similar situations do not. And I wanted to make sure that I was there for them. So at Paola, Kansas High School, I'd already made a few friends. I worked at the local Hot Topic, or the Olathe, Kansas Hot Topic, the neighboring city's Hot Topic. I know. I know. So it was a good job for my 16-year-old self. So in the larger school environment, I did a lot better. I went there one semester and I was named the editor of the high school paper my senior year, and two friends and I decided to start a gay-straight alliance on the campus. This was initially fought by the administration, Paola, Kansas administration. They threatened to remove all student clubs from the campus, specifically so we could not have this one club. Luckily, we had a really amazing theater teacher who was not going to let that happen, and so all the clubs stayed and stated, and which meant that they had to allow the Gay-Straight Alliance on the campus. We were, again, in rural Kansas, so there was a lot of backlash. Kids started wearing KGA t-shirts to the high school, which KGA was the Kill Gays Alliance, that they had formed in response to the Gay-Straight Alliance. The kids that wore these Kill Gays Alliance t-shirt to school were just told to turn them inside out, no problem. No disciplinary action, nothing. And this is still going on in rural Kansas in a very real way. I know that I'm a little bit older now, but this is still happening there. The most epic thing that happened, I think, was two kids created a rap CD about how they were going to kill us, everyone in the GSA, and distributed it throughout the entire high school. The one who had perpetuated that CD, who had distributed it, he got 1 day of in-school suspension for threatening to kill 30 students. So just again to kind of give you an idea of the climate that we were facing and are still facing in a lesser extent now in rural Missouri and Kansas. So when we found out about this, I was ready to go to the ACLU and make a national case out of it, but I left it up to the GSA, and they decided as long as he gave us a public apology that we would let him go, basically. And he gave us a public apology, and we did not contact the ACLU, much to my dismay at that situation. So I graduated from Paola, Kansas after causing some trouble, and ended up in Kansas City, Missouri. I got a job pretty much right after working in Kansas, or moving to Kansas City with ACORN. It's the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. They were recently destroyed by the right wing. Look it up. It happened. They were a really amazing organization that has since been defunded almost completely. I mean, they're no longer around. So I worked for this, and through them, through ACORN, I got a job, or got contacts with the Peruvian chapter of ACORN. So I was 19. I worked about, I think it was 5 jobs for 6 months, and saved up enough money to go to Peru to work with them in their mission to deprivatize the water, because they had recently talked about starting to privatize the water in Peru, and that was a really big issue. I honestly did not help out very much, because when I got to Peru, I did not speak any Spanish. And I knew where I was staying the first 2 days, and that was about it. But I knew that this was a trip that I had to go on, and it was incredibly encouraging for me, because there I saw a culture of activism and a culture of civil disobedience that I hadn't seen in this country yet. There was pretty much no day there that I didn't see a protest happening, and while I was there, we watched as an entire highway system was shut down by people just walking onto it protesting. And that's something that in this country would be an incredibly radical action. And it was a radical action there, but not in the same way. It was not looked upon in the same way that we would look upon something like that here. And it was really encouraging for me to see that the culture can embrace tactics like that. So shortly after I got back was the annual Creating Change conference that came to Kansas City. And it was actually at 19 that I got the award, the Creating Change Award. And it was an amazing honor, and it was also a terrifying experience. It was the first time that I'd really talked to my parents since they had kicked me out. I rekindled my relationship with them and invited them to the ceremony, not expecting them to come, but they did in fact come to the ceremony and saw me speak in front of about 2,000 people. And I think that was the first time that it really clicked with them that this might not be a phase. You know, like this is a pretty bold statement that's happening right now in front of 2,000 people. But and that award was amazing, and rekindling my relationship with my parents was so important to me. But what I really took away from the experience was a speech that Loretta Ross of Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Institute gave. And this is this amazing woman right here. I had always thought that the queer movement should be the one that would unite all people, but I hadn't really heard it put into words as eloquently as I had when Loretta spoke at this conference. She was a keynote speaker that year, and she had said, "We got to understand that multi-issue work, cross-racial work, transgender work, multi-generational work aren't options. They're vital, because we can't build a human rights movement by leaving somebody out. It ain't going to work that way, and we can't sell each other out. That when people think many different ideas and move in the same direction, that's a movement. And when people think the exact same idea and move in the same direction, that's a cult. So are we building a movement, or are we building a cult?" And that was so amazing for me to hear that, because I had never heard it put in that way. And so since that day, I've considered my work organizing around sexual orientation and gender identity to not just be about sexuality and gender, but also about race, ability, class, immigration status, environment, access, age, everything that goes into a person's identity. We have to consider all those things if we want this to be an effective movement. And this was just a revolutionary thought for me. I'd never heard it put in that way. And I knew that if I really wanted to be getting to the root of these things, the root of these problems, then I had to start addressing these topics as well. And it was on this trip that I first met representatives from Soul Force. And for those of you who don't know, Soul Force is a national nonprofit. They work nonviolently to end the religious. This is from their website. I'm reading their mission right now. So They work nonviolently to end religious and political oppressions of LGBTQ people. While they are not themselves faith-based organization, they lead from the understanding that oppressive religious beliefs, civil rights abuses, and anti-feminist attitudes that oppress LGBTQ people are interrelated. They envision a world in which social justice movements are inclusive and collaborative as we help make it possible for all people, regardless of chosen or inherent identities, to have access, opportunity, and security. So this is me with Soul Force. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Soul Force Equality Ride, but it's a 2-month bus trip to conservative religious colleges that ban or discriminate against LGBT students, because we do have a lot of them in this country. We would contact the schools about 2-3 months in advance and tell them that we were coming to campus. About half the schools would invite us onto the campus to talk with their students, to hold presentations about queer identity and how that intersects with religion. And about half the campuses would tell us that we were not actually allowed to come on campus, even though we were going to come on campus, and that if we did come onto the campus, we would be arrested for trespassing. So on those campuses which did not allow us on, we would hold civil disobediences. Often this was symbolic for that specific religion. A lot of times that included letters from LGBTQ or allied students on the campus who had written letters to their administration, anonymous letters to their administration, that we would then attempt to deliver to the administrative offices, usually make it about halfway and then get arrested. It was through this that I really saw how important direct action is, not only in being the ones who are framing the debate, but also in getting that media attention that is so important in helping the larger populace understand the issues. On this trip, it was a 2-month bus trip that, again, an apathetic Methodist household that I had grown up in. I think I'd been to church twice in my life prior to this. And we had to do 6 months of intensive Bible study to prepare, because we needed to be ready for these conversations that we were going to have on these campuses. It was really important for my growth to be able to have those conversations, because this comes up so often in Kansas City, and just in Missouri and Kansas in general. On this trip, I read Henry David Thoreau, I reread Gandhi, I had started to read Audre Lorde. These are all amazing authors, and I recommend all of them. And it was also on this trip that I started to see some of the abuses that our prison system, our prison industrial complex system, can really create for LGBTQ people. On one of our rides, we had several people who were arrested. One who was a trans male. Our trans male rider was strip searched in front of all of the women who were in the cell, basically degraded forcibly, just specifically because he was trans. And because he had an F on his driver's license still, he was searched by a woman in front of all of the women riders, all of the people who had been arrested that were already in the cell, and then jailed with these women as well. And it was such a feeling of helplessness knowing that this state was allowing this inequality. They hadn't done anything illegal. Technically, the police hadn't. But this was an abuse, not only of authority, but of this trans rider who had just been strip searched and degraded in front of all of these people. I was very proud of myself because I made it about to the end of the ride, and I had not had an emotional breakdown yet. 2 months on a bus on a bus with only activists is a very intense experience. There's lots and lots of processing. It's mostly processing, in fact. When you're not doing the organizing work, you're processing. And I was very, very proud of myself for not having had that emotional breakdown yet. That was until we got to Ellendale. Ellendale was a town of about 1,500, and it was set up exactly like the town of Drexel, Missouri. The school that we marched on was exactly where my high school was, in Drexel, Missouri. And so this also, again, in that step of that process of radicalization, this was very important for me. This was me not realizing it at the time, I don't think, but later reassessing it and realizing that this was me confronting Drexel, Missouri in my head. They had given us, at this campus, they had given us a free speech zone, which was a triangle of grass on the very edge of campus where no one could see us, and also with an administrative official standing in between us and the actual campus. So anyone that did want to come talk to us would have to, the administrator would see them walk by. So technically they allowed them to come talk to us, but they didn't really. So we saw that. They had said that we were going to be allowed to be on campus. We got there, we realized we weren't, so we did do a direct action on the campus and were arrested. I was not chosen for that direct action. Instead, I bawled like a baby in a prayer shawl while watching these people get arrested. And it was a very cleansing experience for me, though, to be able to confront symbolically, not directly, but symbolically, that town that had meant so much, that population 1,090 city that had been the birth of it all. And the Equality Ride was very much in the spirit of the Freedom Rides. It very much drew power from those, but also with recognition that the Freedom Riders went through so much more and faced so much more violence than we did on this ride. For those who don't know, the first Freedom Ride took place on May 4th in 1961. It left Washington, D.C. on 2 public buses for the Deep South, and they intended to test the Supreme Court ruling, which was Boynton versus Virginia, which declared segregation in interstate bus and rail stations unconstitutional. They went to challenge this directly, because this is something that they weren't challenging the state necessarily, or the federal government, they were challenging state governments, and they were met with a lot of hostility and were attacked in Birmingham. So that was the inspiration for the Equality Ride. And so this was also a very transformative experience for me, because it made me look at the tactics of previous movements and just how effective that they really could be. Like, we all know the story of Rosa Parks, right? I mean, everyone's heard of Rosa Parks. So was she just an old lady on a bus that just didn't want to get up that day? Or was she the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP and a veteran activist in this field that had organized a rally of several thousand later that night? That she was the second one. She knew what she was doing. It was all very tactical and it was all very strategic. But she totally framed that debate through setting up that action. What we see today, we see the media response to it. We see the rallies that happened that night. We see MLK helping start the bus boycott. We don't see all the strategy and all of the hard work that she really did secretly, not secretly, but she put into this to organize this amazing and super effective action. Okay, so we have a lot of really amazing history to be able to look to when we're trying to talk about radical action or talk about direct action in general. And let's see, is this the right one? Not yet. I'm really bad at this. Okay, I'm going to come back to that one. So, in Kansas City even, we have a pretty impressive queer history. In 1966, Kansas City was the host of the first ever NACO conference, which was the North American Conference of Homophile Organizations, which is a pretty big deal. This happened pre-Stonewall. This was the first ever national conference, and it happened in Kansas City because the West Coast activists and the East Coast activists couldn't decide whether it should happen on the West Coast or the East Coast. So they picked Kansas City because it's right in the middle. So because of that, we have this amazing history in Kansas City. And through that, the Phoenix Society was formed, which was the Phoenix Society for Individual Freedom, which was the first ever gay rights group in Kansas City. And they opened one of the first ever centers, LGBT centers in the Midwest. So we have this pretty amazing history here. In the Midwest. And also, something just kind of like a little fun fact is that Kansas City was mob run for a very long time, which meant that in Kansas City it was one of the only places that in the gay bars you could actually touch your partner, because as long as you're paying the mob, they don't really care what you're doing. Which, take it or leave it. I don't know if that makes it better or not, but it was one of those. And so I heard about the documentary you all have about the queer history of Michigan, or was it West Michigan? Is it Grand Rapids? That's really amazing. That history is so important for you all to know, to build upon. Because a lot of those people, I bet, are still in this community and still could be drawn from their knowledge. So, let's see. I think I actually messed up my slide thing there. So, I'm going to start talking instead about the organization that I recently formed, which was Equal. And as Colette said earlier, Equal stands for Empowering Queer Activists and Leaders. And we formed this organization. It was kind of formed because we in Kansas City realized that first of all, that the LGBT nonprofits in Kansas City weren't being effective. Second of all, there wasn't very, if anything, for queer youth in that town. So this was a group of queer youth who came together to form an organization specifically representing themselves. We've since evolved from that. We now have a board of directors, and we also have the Phoenix Leadership Team, which is named after the Phoenix Society. But the rules, to be in the Phoenix Leadership Team, you have to either be under 18 or still in high school. And they are basically the decision-making body for Equal. So we have this really unique setup that we have high school students and queer and allied high school students, or under 18 youth that are making most of the decisions for this fairly well-established nonprofit in Kansas City. Because we felt, when we came together, we felt very much that when we're organizing, it's not so much organizing to be the leader. It's not so much helping these people rise up to their power, but being on the ground with them and rising up together. And we felt like to truly represent youth, they have to be the ones that are making the decisions. So some of the work that we're doing, does anyone know what's going on in Uganda right now? Anyone? Got a couple people. So in Uganda right now, there's this bill called Buhari's bill, named after David Buhari, who has introduced it. And it would basically mean the death penalty for LGBT citizens in Uganda. It also has a provision that would make it so anyone who doesn't turn in someone they know to be gay would go to jail. This is really intense legislation that's very possibly going to pass at some point in the near future. So, this seems very far removed from Kansas City, except that there were several American evangelicals who moved into Uganda to help craft this legislation. They say that they didn't, but they were at a conference about 3 months before this legislation was introduced with all of these men who introduced the legislation, specifically preaching against homosexuality. So while they may not have helped craft the language of the legislation, they helped foment this anti-homosexuality fervor that's going on in Uganda right now. So these 3 American evangelicals, when it broke nationally in the United States that this was going on in Uganda, which Rachel Maddow has coined the Kill the Gays bill. Thanks, Rachel. When this broke nationally in the United States, those 3 American evangelicals pulled all ties from Uganda. They came back to the States and were like, oh no, we just visit Uganda sometimes. Like, didn't have anything to do with that. There was only one American evangelical who then moved his ministry into Uganda to preach against homosexuality, and that man's name is Lou Engle. And he runs the Call Ministry, and he's in Kansas City. He's a Kansas City resident. So we have this really intense, charismatic evangelical culture that's coming out of Kansas City right now. And this man, Lou Engle, speaks at the International House of Prayer conference every year, the One Thing Conference. And it's IHOP is their name. They're getting sued by the Pancake Company right now, which is terribly exciting. But they have this conference every year that brings 20,000 young evangelicals into Kansas City. And Lou Engle speaks at it every year. And Lou Engle, again, is the one who's helping promote this legislation in Uganda right now. So we decided in Kansas City that we had to do something about this. We weren't quite sure what, but we needed to act. So we got together and we decided that we were going to have a die-in. That we had made contact with Sexual Minorities Uganda, Frank Mugisha in particular, and we had gotten the names of people who had been attacked or killed since this legislation had been introduced, and there's a lot of names. We didn't have enough activists to name them all, in fact. So we found these people who've been either attacked or killed in Uganda since this happened, and we had a symbolic die-in outside of the IHOP conference on the night that Lou Engle spoke. So we wanted to show you that video real fast. We made a video, put it out about a week later. Last year was about getting the Kansas City community involved. This year it's going to be about getting national attention. So we also have looked at this as a 3-year thing. We didn't think that in that first year we were going to be able to pull Lou Engle's ministry out of Uganda. We've tried to be very strategic in it and how we're building this movement every year until the point where we can ask for that. So this is very much a movement, a relationship building movement that we're working on right now. So I'm going to show this video real fast. It's not too long, I promise. Oh. way to fix the sound on that? Technical difficulties, I apologize. It should be sound right now, is there? Nothing? Oh.
It's going to hurt the nation and hurt families.
Yeah, take it back.
People were here tonight to protest the illegal in-motion rebels' involvement in Uganda.
The group Equal, which stands for Empowering Queer Activists and Leaders, protested the International House of Prayers Convention. They're asking the church to help stop the Kansas City-based preacher Lou Engle. The group says Engle promotes a legislation that would call for the death penalty for gays and lesbians in Uganda.
And so we've come here to join you. To pray that your government would have wisdom. To uphold righteousness in this land. We are trying to restrain an agenda that's going to hurt the nation and hurt families. Right now, that homosexual agenda is sweeping into our education system. And parents are losing their rights over the education of their children. I believe there's only one hope. Help us, God. Help us, God. But I believe Uganda has suddenly become ground zero.
Call on all human rights defenders, organizations, religious communities and leaders, governments and civil society globally to take action to ensure that Lou Engle and his associates do not set foot in Uganda, and that the Call Uganda does not proceed with this inflammatory and hate-inducing plan. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti, peace inside of my mind, love and only love is moving me, peace inside of my mind, love and only love is moving me. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti, Om Shanti.
Really hope that people watching the news tonight, hearing all of this, people walking by and hearing us, they will realize what is going on and go look it up, educate themselves, and join in the fight against this.
So what this video doesn't show is the about 500 or so people that had surrounded us at this point, and really were bearing down on us. We managed to still keep it strategic in that one of my co-directors, Yantasia, and we had a quick sidebar when we realized that things were getting really hostile, like towards us. And again, we were singing Om Shanti. You know, we were very non-threatening group in that regard. We had about, I would say about 300, 400, 500 people. It just kept getting bigger and kept getting bigger and kept getting angrier. And Yantasia and I had a sidebar, and we were like, we have to get out of here right now, don't we? And she was like, yes, we do. And so we got on the megaphone, and we said, we're going to sing this song one more time, and then we're going to leave you alone. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for hearing our voices. Please look into this. Please choose for yourself, whether you believe this or not, whether you believe this man, whether you believe us. And please just continue to educate yourselves about this. Again, we didn't have any thought that we were going to get Lou Engle out of Uganda last year. That is very much a long-term goal that we're going to keep working on. This year, no one in Kansas City even knew that this was going on, though. So this year was to build that community there of people that know what's going on. And this work, I feel like we hear a very specific history of the gay movement. We hear about Stonewall and we hear about these things. We don't hear about the Compton riots, which was mostly trans people. The version of Stonewall that we hear, we think of usually, I think, at least I did for a long time. Like when I think of Stonewall, I thought of white gay men, in this gay bar in New York who fought against the police that night. That's not what it was. It was mostly people of color. It was mostly youth. It was mostly, gender deviants. It was mostly transgender people and drag queens before transgender was a word. It was only these were the people that the police were messing with, that were having the raids. There's a lot of prostitutes, a lot of sex workers, and these are the people that fought back that night. And Stonewall, this is our history. Our history is very radical, whether we recognize it or not. And we have a lot of really amazing radical groups that we can look to for that inspiration if we seek them out, because unfortunately that history is not the one that's going to be presented to us. How many people have heard about the Lavender Panthers? They are an amazing group. They were a team of gay vigilantes who were in San Francisco in 1973. They were formed by the Reverend Ray, a Pentecostal evangelist and well-known queer person who was beaten outside of his ministry one night. They patrolled the streets with chains, billy clubs, whistles, and cans of red spray paint to tag anyone that was attacking queer people in San Francisco. And their purpose, as Reverend Ray put it, was to strike terror in the hearts of all those young punks who had been beating up my faggots. Which I think is a great mission statement. So we have groups like, and Colette actually has a really great zine that has some of these organizations in it too. We have groups like the Gay Liberation Front, and they were interested in the sexual liberation of all people. This was 1969 that they were formed, so about the same time as the Stonewall riots. They believed that change wouldn't come unless social institutions were dismantled and redefined without defined sexual roles and definitions of homosexuality. They were very much a queer organization before that had become a term, what it means today. They were for the dismantling of these social institutions. They were not so much for gay marriage as for the dismantling of marriage as a state institution, as a state-recognized institution. And this is in 1969. So, we hear these same voices today and think of them as new and radical, but these voices have been around since the inception of our movement as we know it. So most of these people were involved with the Stonewall riots who formed the Gay Liberation Front. And they organized a candlelight march shortly after, which demanded an end to homosexual persecution. And they believed in larger social ideas. Their standards were not just for gay liberation, but they were also anti-war, and they were for civil rights. They were working to end racism, bigotry, and to establish an open society in which individuals could express themselves freely. They especially fought against the machismo of the gay culture at the time, that the idea that masculinity is superior to femininity. And worked to end the oppression of all individuals. Which again, we think of these as radical things, but these organizations have been around doing this work for a very long time. It's just, this is the history that we're not getting from our books. So we also have groups like Queer Nation, which was from 1990. The founders of Queer Nation, and they are the ones who popularized the term, "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." they were groups that did direct action to bars. They took over straight bars, like very terribly straight bars, and queered them up for a night. And this was their first action that they started. There were very many members of ACT UP, which was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, which ACT UP, we had a very strong ACT UP chapter in Kansas City, and they had direct actions like throwing pig's blood on City Hall steps. And these things, while again they were radical, it might not be where we are with AIDS, which we are still not nearly as far as we need to go. But with AIDS, our understanding of it and our treatment of it, if it hadn't been for these amazing people who were doing these really radical things. These were effective tactics, radical or not. We also have groups like the Street Transgender Action Revolutionaries. And I don't know if anyone knows Sylvia Rivera, but she, again, she's a transgender woman who was at the Stonewall riots and is one of my biggest heroes. It was founded in New York in 1970 by Sylvia and a woman named Marsha Johnson. And what they did was they took in young street transvestites, as the term was used then. We would probably more likely say transgender now. They took in these young kids who were otherwise going to have to sell their bodies to get by. They took them in and they basically raised them after they'd been kicked out of their houses, and they hustled to provide food for these young people so that they would not have to. Again, that's a very radical action, I recognize, but this is an organization that existed specifically to make the lives better for these trans youth. There are people like Audre Lorde, who we don't hear about, who wrote some of the most amazing works that I've ever read. She's a black lesbian poet, and read her books, look her up, Audre Lorde. She is one of the best voices you'll ever hear. So this kind of brings me to the thing that I seem to be most known for, and I'm just going to skip past these. These are logos from some of the organizations that I've talked about. This, the Gay Liberation Front and Queer Nation. And this is Sylvia right here. So, one of the things, I've only got a little bit more. I've got another video clip I'm going to show you real fast. One of the things I'm most known for, and this is kind of funny to me because I've done a lot of activism work in my relatively short life, but one of the things I'm most known for is a protest that I helped organize in opposition to our local Pride Festival. Which, again, hilarious to me that this is what I'm known for, because I've been doing lots more radical stuff than this for a long time. This is just the thing that got the attention on more of a national scale. This is a video that I did for I'mFromDriftwood.com, and it was about what happened with our Gay Pride Festival. And I'm just going to let the video do the explanation, and I promise after this I'm almost done. But this explains it a lot better than I could. So my name is Wick Thomas. I'm originally from Drexel, Missouri. That's where I grew up, spent 17 years of my life, and then spent some more time in rural Kansas, in Paola, Kansas, and then moved to Kansas City when I was 18. Something I don't like about the Kansas City gay community, I think we are really far behind on a lot of our issues. We're not really up to speed on trans issues here. Queer is still not an acceptable term here. There's just so many issues of identity and social justice that haven't even been breached here. This last year, I helped organize a protest against the Kansas City Pride group, which a lot of people didn't really understand why, this queer population was protesting the Gay Pride organization in Kansas City. And there were a lot of reasons for it. The Gay Pride here is a for-profit corporation, and they were charging $500 for nonprofits to table. They had just started charging entrance fees for everyone involved. And there wasn't the community wasn't really getting much back from any of this. They moved one of their events to the Power and Light District in Kansas City, which is really well known for its racist and classist dress code policy. And it's been protested by every group, every civil rights group, the ACLU has protested, the Urban League, the Urban Summit, the NAACP, like all of these things have protested the Power and Light District, and so it was a really big deal when our Gay Pride organization decided to support it. And move into the Power and Light District, and it was being touted as this great thing because for one night the Power and Light District was going to relax its dress code and let us in and not get kicked out, which we saw as a really big insult, that, you know, like, one night of the year you're going to let us in and we're not going to get thrown out. Like, great. We had talked to the Kansas City Star, and we were really worried because they require 25 people to be there before they cover they'll cover a protest. That's just their policy. So we were like, oh, like, please, you know, like, please just let 25 people show up so that this wasn't all for nothing, because there was a lot of fallback about this. And so the organizers got to my house early, and then other people started showing up that we hadn't invited to the house, which was really awesome, because we didn't, you know, they hadn't even been told to, and they started showing up. And so by the time we left, so there were already 23 people. And that was just the core people that were going down to, like, help organize everything. And so by the time we got there, like, I mean, just, you know, people just started showing up, and we really underestimated how much people hated the Power and Light District. We did get a lot of fallback, but we just felt like the message was more important, that, you know, like, if we are doing queer organizing work, we have to be talking about race, and we have to be talking about class, and we have to be talking about gender. Like, you can't organize around queer issues without talking about those things. And it really sucks that it came to the point where we had to protest our pride here. Like, I mean, I'm not excited about that idea, you know, like, but it's not about the, you know, the corporations accepting the gay identity. Like, that's not what Pride was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be a revolutionary act, and one of defiance, and one of community. And a lot of us had felt like it wasn't that anymore, and that we needed to expose that. So I feel like a lot of the organizations that serve LGBT people in Kansas City feel like they can say things now. I feel like they can bring up concerns to the Pride group here, because, you know, there's a precedent for it now. I feel like we opened up a space for dialogue, I think.
This is a cool organization too. I'm from driftwood.com. They just go around the country asking people their stories, and this is the one that I gave, like, probably 30-40 minute interview, and they only used the part about gay pride. But it is very succinct. Our gay pride had gone into this district that was known for its racist policies, that was known for its classist policies, and partnered with them because they were saving money. This was a really big issue for us that we couldn't ignore. One of the most frustrating and most common questions that we got from the organizers of the Pride Festival, and just the general populace, I should say the general white populace of Kansas City, was, I understand how the dress code in the Power and Light District is racist, but how does that affect gay people? Thank you, whoever like sighed back there, because I think when we started this, and I told this group last night, I think when we started organizing for this, we originally were giving really eloquent responses and really, you know, getting to the heart of it and explaining this issue in a really thorough way. But we got this question so much that by the actual protest, I think our answer was just because not all gay people are white. Like, it's just, I mean, it can be summed up in that. I mean, we got that question so frequently in that town. So, but what we found from this was this organizing work was so much more effective if we are crossing these boundaries, if we are forming these coalitions. And I think we've talked about this a lot since I've been in Michigan, because we have a very similar thing in Kansas City and in Missouri and Kansas, we in the Midwest are very nice people. We're just so nice. We're very nice. It's one of our greatest strengths, and it's also, I think, one of our biggest fallbacks when we're trying to do movement building, because we are so nice that we try to avoid direct conflict in many situations, and we often talk ourselves out of direct action, when if we look into the history of it, we'll see that direct action is almost always the thing that catalyzes movements. That direct action is important, not just important, but likely necessary if we actually want these goals. So I've talked a little bit about this tonight. I think that for me, being radically queer means that we are working to unite all aspects of the social justice movement. We are getting to the root of the problem, and that we, through being queer, are denying and at the same time embracing those identities.
those norms of our culture, of orientation, of identity, and that we are working together to solve these problems, again, from the root. I know how hard it is to organize in Kansas and Missouri, and likely in Michigan too. This next, I won't dwell on this too long. This next picture, though, after this happened and before this happened, I've had a lot of people ask, why I stay in Kansas and Missouri. I'm very much a part of the coastal queer communities too, and the coastal queer activist communities and activist communities on a national scale. But I feel like my work is here in the Midwest. I feel like I know how to talk to the people here coming from such a small town, and I also feel like this is where the most important work is left to be done. I think there are a lot of really important conversations happening on the coast, but I think here in the Midwest there are so many people that still need this education. This is something that happened to me, I guess it would be 2.5 years ago now, that I was just walking down the street. I was attacked. I was beat up pretty bad. I don't really remember the situation, so I can't say if it was a biased crime or not. I think it's pretty likely that it was. I was walking alone, and I had on the most adorable outfit. I looked really good that night. So I was actually really, the thing I was most pissed about was that they ruined my pants that I really liked that I was wearing that night. But this is still happening. This is still happening in Kansas. This is still happening in Missouri, and likely this is still happening in Michigan. And if being radical means that this isn't happening anymore, just even if that means to one person, and that's important enough to me to be able to be that radical person. I think we talk ourselves out of radical action and direct action a lot, but I also think, again, if we look into it, the radical action is the most important action in catalyzing a movement. And I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to other people. So I think I'm very much willing to be that radical force so that other people can say, well, at least I'm not quite that radical, so that I can normalize a slightly lesser radical than I am. So I have one clip that I really like to show. Harvey Milk, a lot of people know him. He's an amazing man. But I had never really connected with him, and actually until I had met Colette last year at this conference. They showed us this clip, and it was really important to me, and it really helped me connect with Harvey Milk and his mission. And I'd just like to share that real fast. It's just really short.
Somewhere in Des Moines or Santa.
So this video is really powerful for me just because, mostly because of the line in it in which he says, when you see this on TV, you have a few options. You can move to California, which, many of us choose. You can move to California. You can commit suicide, which is one I hope that you would never choose. Or you can stay and fight. And that really resonated with me a lot because, again, I feel that my work is here in the Midwest. But I would like to add to Harvey Milk's quote and say that if you do choose that third option to stay and fight, then your only option then becomes to be fucking fabulous. Because that's the only way to be an effective and powerful voice in the Midwest, is you have to rise above so much shit that you are the most fabulous person you have ever met. And I hope and challenge each and every one of you in this room to please to be that person. I think, again, we in the Midwest are very nice. We're very nice people, but sometimes agitation is necessary to create a true movement, to create actual change. And so that's what I'd like to leave you all with. I'd like to, again, thank Colette and everyone who brought me here. And yeah, this is me becoming radically queer. So thank you. Yeah, and I think we were going to do a question and answer, if anyone had any questions for me. My little sister? Yeah, she's my bestie. She's hilarious to me because, again, I've never met anyone who has such a similar thought process as I do. But she won't come to like anything I invite her to. She very much love each other, but I think she's terrified of my friends. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Besides forming like ally groups
Mm-hmm.
as a teacher,
Yeah.
what other options do you have to help students and educate because Michigan can get fired or have that?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really hard, especially right now, I think, with the climate for teachers that we've got, is a really hard, choice to have to make. Do you have a Gay Straight Alliance at the school? You don't? Do you? Okay. Well, I mean, my first thought, I think, would be to, if they don't have a Gay Straight Alliance, there are kids who want to start one, at the school, and especially for teachers who are straight allies, it is really helpful for a straight ally to be that person that helps start that GSA, because they can't then be, not that they could ever be fired for their sexual orientation, but they can be. So I think, finding those kids that are starting that GSA is really important. I think also there are little things like safe space stickers that you can put in your classroom. It's usually just a rainbow. GLSEN does this safe space training program that after you go through it, and you can do it online, I believe, but they give you this little kit, and you can put safe space stickers everywhere so that they know that you are someone that they can talk to. Even if they never talk to you, they know that you are someone that they can talk to. And just having that presence, I think, is really important. So is that helpful at all? Okay, cool. Other questions?
When did it come forward from around like acceptance? Because I know a lot of, first of my friends,
Yeah.
were religious, they don't fully accept
Yeah.
that they love you.
Yeah. Love the sin or hate the sin, right? It's something we hear a lot.
And that's something I'm dealing with my folks.
Yeah.
That's something that's like, what, it's not okay. You love me or you don't.
Yeah, well, I feel like I was kind of lucky in that situation, is that I was so completely disowned that now that we have rekindled a relationship, they don't really have anything that they can use against me. Like, they can't disown me again. They've already done that, So the relationship is very voluntary on my part. I don't feel like I need them in my life, but I want them in my life. So I feel like, in a weird way, I kind of got lucky in that situation. I would say don't give up on them. That a lot of times it takes a long time to come around, but there are some amazing groups. I know there is a Michigan PFLAG, right? Okay, so I mean, I know that most parents who aren't supportive aren't going to be interested in going to something like that, but it's worth a try. It took my parents a very long time to come around, and they won't ask me any personal questions about my life. I very much tell them everything going on in my life. Again, but they would never ask. They don't want to know those aspects of my life, but they don't have a choice if they want to be in my life now. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It did take them. I mean, it took them 2 years to even talk to me, though. And then it took another probably 6 before we were able to have a conversation. So about anything real. So it took a long time. Yeah. Anyone else? Questions? Colette? No?
Well, thank you, Rick.
Thank you. Becoming radically queer.
What kids said, and this is probably happening in Michigan as well. Of course it is. There are hate crimes against the gay community every day in Michigan. In Grand Rapids, specifically 2 months ago, there was a hate crime against a gay man who was leaving an Equality Michigan event, ironically enough. And he was beaten up, called faggot, and told that he deserved to die. This Thursday, there's an event at Rosa Parks Circle starting at 6:30. It's called Step Out and Step Up. And it's men against violence. Violence against other men, against women, and against children. And all are invited to walk to reclaim spaces where violence has occurred in Grand Rapids. So that's this Thursday at 6:30, and I hope you'll join us. So please take a moment to finish filling out your evaluation, and thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the event. We're coming out today. And Whip will be around if you want to talk to him.
Yeah, feel free.